Good evening. I put the short one right in the middle. I like it. How's everybody doing tonight? Thank you for answering. I appreciate it. I'm Catherine Nero from the Inquirer, and I'm here with an esteemed panel. You know, we've been talking about all the great things that the Port has been doing, and it is wonderful what we have learned tonight. There's still some things to be done, and that's what we're talking about tonight. This annual meeting is focused on opportunity, and that's really what we're talking about, is the Port makes investments in places to stimulate growth. And tonight, this panel is assembled to talk about that growth. That is not just growth, but it's inclusive growth, and it's ideas on how to help people in this area and in our region's incredible renaissance that we've all witnessed, how we can help people through expanding the opportunity of who gets to have that incredible renaissance, and specifically owning real estate of worth. And so these panelists are here, have valuable insight, and so we're going to get started with them. First, though, I want to introduce everyone we have here. We've heard their names tonight. We're going to put names with faces. And we start here with Janice Jones, the Executive Director of Housing Opportunities Made Equal, or HOME. We have Eric Kearney, the President and CEO of the African American Chamber of Commerce, here on the end. Let's give Janice a round of applause at the very least. Janice, it's always tough going first. I apologize. We also have Chinedu Mudukwe, President and founder of the Kingsley & Company here. And last but not least, Mike Smith, Vice President of Commercial Development at the Port. So we welcome our esteemed panel. Let's get right to it. And so, Janice, we want to start with you. And so specifically, if we're going to talk about owning real estate of worth, we have to kind of look back and learn historically about why this hasn't happened so far. So can you explain why so many communities like ours are struggling with inequitable real estate?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Hello. Hey. So I want to take a brief history lesson, but if I start going on too much, somebody will give me, a sign that says, okay, let's skip 10 years. Because the history of inequitable development in our country, unfortunately, goes way, way back. But a good jumping off point for fair housing folks, which I'm the Director of Housing Opportunities Made Equal. We are the fair housing agency here in Greater Cincinnati. We work to enforce fair housing laws and regulations, help landlord-tenant issues, and educate the community quickly. So that's why we care. That's why that's where we fit in. But way before HOME, way before the Fair Housing Act, there was concerted, insidious effort to exclude African Americans from certain communities. So in the 30s and 40s began a process of redlining. And that entailed government-sanctioned discrimination based on race, where communities were literally redlined. So anybody watch Star Trek? Next Generation? Mm-hmm. Or the original series, okay? All of them. Okay, so they all have force fields, right? So everybody knows, what happens when the force field goes up. Somebody gets thrown in the brig, the force field goes up. Well, that's what redlining did to some communities when it came to loans and the ability of African Americans to have home loans. So some communities were just redlined and called undesirable, blighted, problematic. There are slightly different terms in different parts of the country, but it essentially meant that these communities, African Americans, primarily African American settled, were unable to get government insurance on the loans to purchase a house. These were what were the predecessor of FHA loans. These were GI bills. These were all any type of loan that existed at that time, and its successor thereof. The redlining was an important part of that process. In addition to that, there were restrictive covenants going back to the Civil War. So there's a book by Richard Rothstein that came out last year that has a very in-depth history of the color of law, and it talks specifically about going back to post-Reconstruction and these restrictive covenants and deeds, where it's even if a white family wanted to sell their house to a black family, they couldn't, because you couldn't transfer the deed. So that was one part of our history. And if you look at the redlining maps from the 30s and 40s, it wasn't hidden, it wasn't secret. It's something you can pull up online and look at Cincinnati or Dayton or Hamilton or Los Angeles, and you can see the communities where there was concerted, long-term disinvestment. So you flash forward a little bit to the 60s. Martin Luther King was assassinated on April 4th. The Fair Housing Act was signed on April 11th, and Housing Opportunities Made Equal came into play. I think we incorporated in May. Since then, we've still battled the legacy of predatory lending, of these redlined districts, the lack of access, the needs of the unbanked. But for us, if we want to start and say, well, how did all this start? Where did it happen? We go back to the history of redlining and the government sanction all the way from the federal government down to the state and local levels and block by block.
And so, thank you, Janice. And so, with that in mind, Eric, what are some of the approaches that the African American Chamber has kind of undertaken to prevent this?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Catherine, for including me on the panel, and thank you to the Port Authority. The African American Chamber of Commerce takes a three-prong approach. First, we talk about education. We provide programming to educate people about opportunities that are available. Second, we do relationship building. So we create new relationships, introduce people that may have common interest, that they can work together. And three, we have an equity fund where small business owners can participate in equity projects. And so we're pooling money together in order to take a small interest in a commercial real estate project somewhere in the greater Cincinnati area. And so those three strategies or approaches that we're using are how we're trying to increase wealth creation inside the African American community and amongst our members.
And so, Chinadum, for you, boots on the ground, so to speak, you're in the midst of business relationships, and that's a big part of it. So,
absolutely,
what sort of relationships have kind of made the difference for you and your company?
I mean, relationships are truly everything in this real estate business. And, for me personally, I got to share a story. I think it was back to 2009 when I was still playing professional football about 100 pounds ago for the Cincinnati Bengals. And I had heard about this amazing project that was done. It was called the Vernon Manor 1. And so I started doing a little bit of research and due diligence, and I'm like, God, I got to find this group of people that have been doing something that's innovative and hadn't been done across the country. And I track it down, and I get, connected to Ed Rigo, and Ed Rigo explains to me, well, there's some other people to this, and he really doesn't give me a straight answer. So I'm like, all right, well, let me talk to Carl. I talked to Carl, and Carl's like, the person you talk to is Laura. I'm like, who's Laura? And I seek out this lady named Laura Brunner, and I stalk her for about 6 months, leaving her.
As one does, yes.
6 months. But, at the end of the day, she made some time. And that was in 2009. And all she knew was that it was a meathead football player and begging her to go to grab a cup of coffee. So we actually do coffee at Coffee Emporium on Central Parkway. And I think I just flipped a property. I bought it at the sheriff's sale for like I bought it for $50K, turned and sold it for $150. I thought I was doing really big work. And I sit down with Laura, and she's like, well, what are you doing? What are you looking at doing? And I'm like, I'm trying to find my way in commercial real estate. She's like, well, what projects have you done? I was like, Laura, I have to tell you, I haven't really done any projects. And she's like, well, listen, I got this deal for you. It's a sweetheart deal. I'm like, I want to hear it. Let's hear it. She's like, it's called the 580 building. It's $15 million. I said, Lord, I almost fell out of my seat. I mean, I know, and I was like, well, I'm not really at that point. Well, what she stone cold turned to me and said, you got to start thinking bigger. And that meant a lot to me. And so as I'm sitting in our 8:30 meeting this morning, and Jerry, Tappy, and I, we meet every other Tuesday at 7:30. We're talking about all the real estate projects that we have in the pipeline, and we're coming up on $250 million, $150 million of which is guaranteed. We're pot committed. We're moving, right? It's a big deal.
That's excellent.
So I know we got Alexis, Robert Sanders, Jerry Tepe's in the room, Marty's in the room, Mark, Steve. You can blame creating this monster 100% on Laura Brunner for challenging me to think bigger. It's a big deal. But I think the work that the Port is doing in the greater Cincinnati area is critical. You see other quasi public-private agencies throughout the country that are doing this type of work. And they're, it's not easy work. It's tough. And, I would be remiss without at least recognizing a few people here that we know are also in the trenches with the port, with Laura, with her team. I know Reverend Lynch is in here, Iris Rowley, Cinnamon from CEAI. I know Russ Harrison, Miss Harrison, who actually runs that show. She's from ADC, Alexis and Tia from Seven Hills. And, the public-private partnership that happens, I think the mayor touched on it earlier, it's not easy. There's a lot of layers and complexity that go along with this type of urban development and urban empowerment. And not just for African Americans, but also for women. The commercial real estate space is changing, and it's changing fast. And I think what the port, what Laura, her team is doing is instrumental. It's critical. We need it. We need more of it. And I can't think of a better person to really lead that effort than Laura. So please give everybody a round of applause for Laura, her team, at the port, what everyone's doing. I love it. Can't do it enough.
Jen, thank you. And so, Mike, let's compound on that. We've sung the praises of Laura here, but and she'll be the first to tell you there's more than just Laura to the port. What are you guys doing to really impact people the way the port has impacted Chinadoo?
Well, I wanted to share a couple of facts. Of all the Americans accumulative who have a net worth of $500,000 or more, a third of that is in commercial real estate, where less than 4% of African Americans actually participate in the commercial real estate game. So what we want to do is we want to lower the barriers to entry. So we've established a 501c3 that allows us to partner with developers who might want to utilize our resources and our various skill sets to basically learn to get projects done. When we go into residential neighborhoods, we go in first. So we catalyze that neighborhood, we go in, we set the market, we set the comps, and allows private investors to come in behind us, taking a lesser risk, and allows them to put money into their particular projects, and they know that they can make money now that we set their particular comps. And it allows us to be able to do work in other neighborhoods on different streets, because once that neighborhood catches fire, so to speak, and the private investor comes in, it allows us to move to other neighborhoods, other streets, and spend that particular money. But African American wealth attainment is something that's I'm very passionate about. And when I came to the port, Laura and I talked, and one of the relationships that was very key that we discovered was that working with the African American Chamber. So once a quarter, we have an event, a collaboration with the African American Chamber, where we just don't talk about random topics. We have a series of events around around wealth attainment for African Americans using real estate as a tool.
And so, in addition to that, Eric, what else does what other events can people take part in if they want to get involved?
Well, as Michael just mentioned, we do a quarterly forum with the Port Authority where, I can't thank the Port enough. They outline what projects or what neighborhoods they are going to work in the upcoming 6, 9, 12 months. So if you are in construction, if you're an investor, if you are looking for a job, if you come to that, you know where things are going to be moving and in what direction. So that's been absolutely great. And then just to put a plug in for the African American Chamber, we do 120 events a year for small businesses. So please come to our events.
Eric, thank you. And we will end where we started with Janice. And Janice, so what else should we know before we leave here about the work being done toward more equitable real estate ownership?
Sure. Well, Home is the fair housing agency in Greater Cincinnati, and so we keep our ear to the ground on what's going on in different communities around development, inclusion, equity, diversity, because we see that as part of our charge under the Fair Housing Act to affirmatively further fair housing. So we stay engaged with the community. Home does about 140 trainings a year for real estate developers, bankers, insurance agents, property managers and consumers about their fair housing rights. And also, we inform people about what home ownership is, what that can mean, how that can change your family's trajectory and pass that wealth on from one generation to the next. One thing that concerns us when we have our landlord-tenant calls, and these are calls that we get when individuals call us and they're having an issue with the landlord. And I know we're talking about home ownership today, but I think this is a key point. Because we'll say, okay, you know, what's going on? Well, I'm behind on the rent. Well, how much rent are you paying? Some people are paying $1,500, $1,600, $1,700, $1,800 a month in rent. And we see that as a stopping point. We always want to address the crisis in the moment of whatever's going on, but we also want to put, you know, something towards them to say, you know, with that much rent, you can afford a home. And you I know you have children, I know you have a family, I know you're working hard, and you want to pass wealth off from this generation to the next generation. And wealth accumulation in this country comes from home ownership, from generation to generation. So we say it's not necessarily your 401k because you're going to spend that, right? Eventually you're going to spend that. It's not going to be your poker game. It's not going to be Bitcoin. It's not going to be any of those things. It's not going to be the lottery. It's probably going to be home ownership. So how can we put folks in connection to how to make that a reality, I think is important for our work as well as keeping our ear to the ground and knowing what's going on in the communities and making sure folks know if they're experiencing issues with their housing, whatever it is, to contact home. And we've been there for 51 years, and we plan to be here going forward.
Janice, thank you. And I know, like you probably have a million other questions. And the beauty of this is you can ask those, and potentially with alcohol, too. Is that the plan? At the very least, in a discussion out in the lobby. So thank you guys for listening so intently. Thank you for the panelists for such, it was a riveting conversation, and again, one that needed to be had. So thank you very much.